that or that down here. Here we have the ass end of a brand new Volkswagen Passat. Let me introduce you to the world of ripple effects. So here I am thinking, okay, I'm gonna shoot a video. Often I'm asked, can you use, for example, ceramics, the polish that is my default polish, can you use it to polish plastic? Often I will refer to clear coat at a rudimentary level as a form of plastic, but like everything else in life, nothing is created equal. So this plastic tail lens, most people would refer to that as plastic, but for the sake of this video, this is plastic and the clear coat is a form of plastic. So the question, can you polish plastic with the same product that you polish paint? I want to show what is possible with polishing plastic tail lenses, but I thought, well, shoot, if I'm going to show that, why not just show what is possible with polishing this type of plastic called clear coat when compared to this type of plastic, the tail lens. What I want to do is bust out the scan grip light. Let me just say this, lighting is everything. Now, yes, that's a massive oversimplification, and it's also hyperbolic, but do not underestimate the power of lighting. Certain lighting will reveal certain blemishes and defects. Swirl marks can reveal themselves pretty much anywhere. There's actually 3 requirements if I'm gonna get really granular on this topic. 1, there's gotta be scratches. 2, there's gotta be a light source. And 3, perhaps one of the most critical things, which is why we have the term swirl marks, is the light source needs to be circular in shape. Traditionally, when people look at their car and they notice this effect, this unwanted effect, they will refer to that as swirl marks because it takes on a swirled or a circular pattern. The only reason that's happening is because the light source is circular in nature, hence the sun, or hence this light, which is a circular shape. So those scratches are not actually circular scratches. Those scratches are just scratches in endless directions on the layer or the surface of this plastic and the car paint. But to really pump up the jam here, what I'm gonna do is take this to a higher degree of imperfection. I'm gonna lower the standard at the moment and create additional defects, scratches, swirl marks. I'm gonna introduce some scratches to the equation through various types of scrub pads, brushes that I've seen people use on their car. This is to replicate years and years of improper care on cars in the form of washing, drying, waxing, polishing, whatever. So here I have what is considered a non-abrasive scratch pad. Of course, there's a term that's relative. So this may be non-abrasive on a metal pan, a scrub pan, or on other surfaces within your house, but when used on plastic, suddenly it becomes abrasive. It will introduce scratches to the equation. So I'm gonna sit here and I'm going to just replicate some of the stuff. And yes, I'm going onto the paint because I'm going to also be testing this process on the paint while simultaneously showing it on what most people would default to as a plastic back lens. So here I am, scrub, scrub, scrub. You'll notice that the pattern, I can go back and forth, up and down, left and right, side to side. You can call it whatever you want. Now I'm going to take the infamous magic eraser. I'm going to actually apply a little water here to lubricate it so that I can, and I'm really laying into this. And I'm going to go in a circular pattern, and I'm going to go in a back and forth pattern. And really what I should be doing, because this is one of the big misnomers in this industry, is that swirl marks are created by swirled scratches, circular scratches in paint, when in reality that is not true. It's just a false statement that is repeated endlessly by what I call YouTube detailing grifters. So I'm actually just going to go back and forth on this. mar up, scratch up, abrade up this surface extensively. And then we'll take it from there and just see how much learning I can do, inflict upon you, as long as you are willing to tune in and expand your mind and learn along the way. So let's pan. Got my little GoPro going on here. I'm just gonna pan around so we can see some of the reflections. I'm gonna keep that light in the same position. I'm gonna take this to a whole other level. But what I wanna do is section off an area. So I'm gonna tape up this panel. It's natural character line, it's natural separation line. Also gonna tape up this. Is a form of protection, because what I'm about to do is introduce some 2500 grit sanding marks to show you, well, a few things. One, you can actually do wet sanding on plastic just as you can do wet sanding on clear coat, how to correct it, how to polish it away. I'm also going to do it by hand, so I want to section this off also. But first, okay, if you've been playing along with my videos as of recent, the word for the day is tape. One word, tape. That is the secret word of the day. Put that independently in the comments below and play along, and we'll see who sustains for what length of time that I decide to insert the word of the day, tape. Here is my 2500 grit sanding paper. I have a rather rigid sanding block. They actually call this sanding backing pad by Meguiar's. So this is very, very firm. Now the reason I want to do that versus just using my hand, because I want to retain as much flatness as possible. For example, if I was wet sanding this, and the reason they call this wet sanding is for the obvious reason, is that sandpaper intended to be used with water. Why would you want to use water? Well, that allows the material that you shave off, sand off, to flow so that it doesn't clog up your sanding paper. This is one of the reasons we default to wet sanding. So what I'm going to do is sand this area. Now, if you're already going into shock, that's because you, well, yes, it's disturbing in a level. Who would ever want to take sandpaper to car paint? But what we have here is a trouble zone, warning zone. So this is not perfectly even. There's a slight step here, which means that if I were to continue to sand here, like I was, this step, so this body panel, actually it's different based on where it is. I would have to give it to Volkswagen. Their alignment, their fit and finish is truly superior. Very high quality, just as the paint quality, very, very excellent paint quality. Point is I don't want to burn through this edge. So this is where I would take some precaution. Dry this off. And this video, like every single step that I'm doing here, can be scrutinized. Some keyboard jockey will bounce onto the video and they'll apply their backseat driving to the moment, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I would never do that. Oh my gosh, that is incorrect. Whatever, whatever, whatever. So in my arsenal, I typically default to two types of tape, 4 different widths, all based on a strategy. So I want to tape off this very fine area here, and there's a few ways I can actually do that. I can either use a wide piece of tape to cover both materials simultaneously, or I can use a very thin strip like this. So I really like this tape. It's tape that's used within the body shop world. custom painting world. So I can intricately, precisely get this tape in there and use it to protect the edge of the white paint. This is what I'm focused on right now, is protecting that high point of the white tape. Because this paint's a little bit higher than the lens here, and I've got a sanding block, I'm just gonna sand and finesse this without burning that edge, or without, more precisely, without reducing that edge to a point that would make it unsafe when it comes time to polish. So I want to inflict 2000 grit sanding marks onto this to really take it to the extreme as far as replicating kind of the abuse that people put their cars into, because I have no idea who's going to find this video. Are you a car owner? And by the way, there's a character line right here. So this represents a subtle high point. Because I know what I'm doing, I can finesse it. So I'm not going to sand directly across this for an extended period of time. I'll place the block this way so that it naturally goes off the edge of this high point, just as I will place the block flat this way. Anyhow, it's just one of the endless things that you have to be mindful of when you're doing this. I could also tape this high point up. I can finesse around it, because when I'm all finished with this and I pull back from normal viewing distances, it would be hard to discern as to whether this was truly sanded flat or not. Now, because the goal of this video is to not do high level wet sanding techniques, because I could wet sand this additionally to remove all form of orange peel effect. Orange peel is a textured to the paint. So there's still some points here, and I can see because of the reflection that I have not touched it with the sandpaper. And the goal is to not sand this perfectly flat. I just want to show you, can you polish clear lens, paint? I'm going to do the top half. I think I'll do the top half by hand, the bottom half with a buffer. So because I know that's a big deciding factor for a lot of guys is, oh wow, do I want to invest in a buffer, pads, special whatevers? It's just more of a commitment versus trying to get acceptable results by hand. So yes, you can polish both by hand. Any product, regardless of what it says, can be used by hand and machine. But welcome to the world of endless marketing and endless hype, and it's literally like anything goes. So what I will do is now use a thicker tape, and I will put it right along this character line, which in this lighting is kind of difficult because I would actually adjust lighting so I can see it a little better. So there's our character line right there. It's subtle, but it's there. Comes down and then kind of drops off more vertical right through here. So not only is that a visual indicator, but it is a physical barrier, a physical form of protection. So let's just view this. You can see the sand marks, the dullness that I've created. So here it's a little shinier. Here it's dull from the sanding marks. Here we go into the paint that's been dulled up also because of the sanding. Let's bust out, because I was also going to shoot a video about these type of scratch removers, and I'm going to wax long and strong on the endless type of marketing BS that these guys use. Pretty much every company that sells retail uses a hefty amount of marketing to sell their product. So it's not to suggest that the product doesn't work. It's just I take issue with the way they market it, the way they package it. So here I'm polishing by hand. Scratch Doctor by New Finish. Yes, I think this one actually says, wow, I can smell the solvents in this product already just from here. So the question is okay, I'm not looking for perfection, Darren. I just want it better. So I don't want to have to buy a buffer. I don't have to buy special pads, whatever. I just want to polish out, rub out my car by hand because I heard that buffers are unsafe. Well, what you have to accept is that your hand will never replicate what can be produced by a machine. A machine, yes, it's much more, commitment level is much more. I mean, you're gonna have to buy a machine, that's added money, you're gonna have to learn how to use it, which by the way is not really much of a learning curve these days. So the commitment level between doing it by hand versus machine is significant. Don't get me wrong, but you have to accept that you have far more inferior results when doing it by hand. And I would have to keep rubbing and rubbing and rubbing because the sand marks are not gone yet. Just as the swirl marks on here are not gone yet. So what I would then do, let's just pretend, and by the way, I always recommend a microfiber cloth. They are the safest, most gentlest cloth for your car, regardless of what you're doing. Washing it, waxing it, drying it, polishing it. So now, and that's my default rule if you're a beginner, is you test a product. And what I'm testing here is how I'm going back and forth. Am I going in circular motion, up and down, how much pressure? So really, these are all the things that don't necessarily translate on the video unless I try to dissect them in my head first, and then remember to call them out as I'm doing it. So for example, I'm staying on a top, or I'm staying on this side of this separation line because I'm going to do this with a buffer. I'm paying attention to what's happening as I'm watching it happen. In this case, what's happening is a lot of what's not happening because this product is not proving to be particularly effective using it by hand to remove sanding marks. And 2500 grit sanding marks is not what is considered overly aggressive in the world of polishing. I would have thought that this scratch doctor would have actually been more effective at removing these sanding marks. Does it look better? Yeah, well here you can see here's before, here's after, so yes, this looks better, but the paint is far from corrected. Let me just bring in for a tighter view, showing the light, sweeping around. This is the sanded area. That's the below area, and here's the polished area. It does not look particularly polished. Now there'll be some very dramatic unevenness here because I was not overly aggressive with the sandpaper. Intentionally I wasn't. So one of the many things that I'm trying to highlight within this video is there's always going to be trade-offs, hand versus machine. There's plenty of bad stories surrounding machines and use of them, but you have to accept that the limitations are going to be pretty extreme. If you think you're going to be doing this by hand, if you think you're going to achieve the same results as a machine, and to think that you're actually going to be able to do this around your entire car. So it just becomes an impossible ask, in my opinion. So let's bust out, and this is what most of you will bust out with, is what's called a dual action. Has two movements, spins, and it circles like this. It's random orbital because this action, if there's enough pressure applied during the polishing process, this will stop spinning, but it will continue to move in that circular pattern still. So this whole plate, the backing plate here, does go in an orbital pattern, and that's where the throw is. This is a short throw, 15 millimeter throw, but it's also intended to spin. which is a limitation because only one movement, this little movement versus that movement, is gear driven. I will default to my favorite polish, the industry's original single product polish. What that means is that instead of the multiple compounds and polishes the industry would want you to use, you can do the heavy correcting and finish down to a swirl-free finish. What you would do is you would just switch out pads. You might use different buffers, different speeds, different pressure. So you have that kind of control, but this eliminates the complexity that the industry would have you sign on to. I'm going to apply unceremoniously to my pad to season it for the first time. Now I accept that this is unacceptable results. I'm not going to sit here for the next 2 hours trying to finesse this lens and this paint back to perfection. So at this point now it's just like, okay, you saw what I did by hand, very ineffective. Yes, some of the other products, scratch removers that are intended to be used by hand and packaged and marketed that way, might prove more effective, but it still becomes an impossible ask, especially if you think you're going to be doing this to your whole car versus using a buffer. So maybe at this point what I'll do is I will default to an orbital for the top and a rotary to the bottom. In order to maintain that clear line of demarcation, I will add some additional protection so that I can have some overlap with my buffer without actually touching the paint. And just FYI, I'm going to dial this up to a speed 6, which is pretty much the top speed of any of these orbital buffers. Something you might have noticed, because this is not a flat surface, that this will have stopped spinning like this. Continues to oscillate, vibrate, you can call it whatever you want, but this movement continued, or I'm sorry, ceased to continue. It wasn't until I went more on a flatter surface that this was able to continue to spin. So as I'm up here trying to go up on an edge to get this area in here, or the tighter, a little bit tighter area in here, going up on an edge, will cause this to stop spinning. So there's a trade-off. I call this kind of a lack of control. You don't have absolute, or the absolute, or the level of control that you can with a rotary polisher. But this has a easier learning curve, so I understand the appeal. I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other to adopt one or the other. It's just that I would say that compared to a rotary, this has more limitations. A rotary, yes, it's a longer learning curve, but you have more versatility with it. Now, many of you, if you're a complete beginner, may be wondering, like, how is it possible that that tape can even remain there? It is starting to come off at this point, but that's what's kind of interesting. And now I'm going to just take this off for the big reveal as far as the before and after. So at this point, officially, I have this little separation here that was protected by tape. You may say, oh, Darren, how are you going to polish that? Well, only you can decide. And this will be largely determined on a few things. One, your level of perfection that you are chasing. Who is your customer? How are they going to scrutinize this? How about your standards? Is this acceptable to you? Is it unacceptable? So back from normal viewing distances, this would disappear. I would not be able to tell that this was covered, not sanded, not polished to perfection, whatever. So this is where you have a couple options. One, You can take some polish, come in here by hand, and just finesse the high point of this. But because I accept what I would call both the limitations and the merits of this type of buffer, incredibly safe. It would be hard to burn through a character line with this buffer because of its dual movements. I also accept that this is made with what I call controlled abrasive technology. So that, as the name suggests, is more about control. In comparison to most products, they're made with what is called diminishing abrasive technology. So the abrasives in the other products are intended to diminish. The problem is you lose control because you do not, A, know precisely how big those abrasives start out, and B, you don't know how quickly or how slowly they break down during the polishing process. I have to accept that those products, it's going to be very inconsistent as to how those endless particles break down at varying rates. So that's what I call lack of control. So I love control, but everything in life has trade-offs. So because I know what I'm doing, I can finesse this edge here, this character line here, but once again, I do want this very distinct line of demarcation. So what I will do is I'm just going to position this just a hair lower than the original line so I can finesse this high point here. Now, if you're really playing along, paying attention, you will notice that the tape essentially stopped here, but I continue to polish here. So that would be a vulnerable area, one that you may not pick up till after the fact. Now, what should be showing you is that that circular light from the scan grip is way more refined. It's not showing that scattered pattern of what most people would call swirl marks. Also, same with the paint. It's not showing that scattered pattern. Now that paint is not perfect because I can still see there's some sanding marks towards the top right there versus down here. So I'm using the light, that circular shape right in the middle, to show you that the paint needs more correcting up there. But this is where I will bust out my rotary polisher, because I could actually say that this is safer than a dual action. Because if I'm trying to finesse this curvature, because what happens is panel comes up like that, then tucks in right here, and then flares out. So it's really hard to finesse the orbital so that it can really do its job here. So what I will do is I will finesse this area by applying some polish in a very strategic fashion. I will just push the polish in a little bit so that I can then finesse it. There, now I finessed it right in there, and I could say in many ways that that rotary polisher, despite all the horror stories, in this context is actually safer, certainly more effective than the dual action, but I get it. It's got a longer learning curve. So let me pull this tape off so that we can see. Again, what I want to do is really show a distinction. Now I'm probably not getting that tape precisely right, but what I want to do is show a clear distinction between panel A and panel B, because I am being impatient right now. And because the rotary polisher is all about speed, what I call speed and control. And by the way, if you're on the fence as far as wanting to get one of these, because if it's got a what's called a variable speed trigger, I can adjust the speed of the trigger, plus I can dial it way down. So this one, which is my favorite current rotary polisher, can dial down to a speed of 800. That may seem like a lot to you if you're a complete beginner, but that is very slow. So I could dial this all the way down and even use the trigger to dial it down even further. So I could sit here and just finesse this area right here. And I'm gonna do that based on my years, actually decades of experience. So that's where only you can decide what you're willing to risk based on your skill set, your experience level, those types of things. Now, because I have introduced what is called swirl marks. Officially, that is what swirl marks are buffer tracks, holograms, buffer trails, whatever. In the common world of car ownership, beginners, you call swirl marks something else. In the professional world, swirl marks are a result of using a rotary polisher. And that was the heaviest duty, or I should say, that is the most aggressive cutting pad, a wool pad, our blue CSI wool cutting pad. That will introduce swirl marks. So at this point, I would switch pads and finesse this area. Now this is part of their ring system, which has a dedicated backing plate. So it's very easy to center the pad. At this point, now first off, it's white, very forgiving color. So I could pull this into the sun. 98 out of 100 people would look at this and say, thumbs up. That looks perfect. But I know there's swirl marks. I know there's hologramming. So in order to finesse that out, I'm going to simply switch pads. I'm going to retain using the ceramics, which is part of the single product polish. And this I'm going to dedicate to Richard Sane, because he asked, like, well, Darren, how come you switch to a dual action instead of just switching to a foam pad on the rotary? That's just a case by case. Sometimes if the dual action's out, and that's why a mechanic has like 100,000 tools. The right tool can make or break your world, certainly make your life easier. So that's where I like having tools, I like having options, so that I can finesse the moment based on the moment. Am I feeling particularly lazy or motivated? So there's everything, once again, has trade-offs. I'm gonna dial this down to a speed setting of 1,000. The rotary will want to pull, and that's where you have to control it as an operator. It will want to pull very differently than a dual action, which is why I went up onto this edge with the buffer held at this position so that I had the strength to control the polisher itself. Wipe off the residue. Now we can go for what we call a bigger reveal. Here we have a refinement in the light itself, the circular pattern. We don't see the swirl marks. Same with on that lens. See how precise that is as compared to that? So I could start this video out by saying, which do you prefer, that or that? That or that down here? I'm gonna try to see how significant those swirl marks are down south compared to up north. Now what I'll do is I'm gonna correct this with a rotary, and the sanding marks really only go out to about here. So I'm just going to, this is a very broad scope. So if I know the sand marks end about here, but I want to polish past the sand marks, so that's what I'm going to do. Also want to correct this. I'm going to feel to see the high point is actually on the lens here. So this sits at an elevated level compared to the body panel. Right up here, it's pretty close. So perhaps to address different options, I will use some tape along here. This will both simultaneously protect the plastic lens of the light as well as the paint. And I will apply a little bit more. This stuff can be stretched, which is really kind of handy at times. So I can stretch this and really finesse it how I want. Now I've got this character line here, and I'm just giving you some options if you're a beginner so that you can have a more stress-free polishing experience, especially if you're using a rotary polisher. So I'll tell you, this is just one of the tricks that you can use is I can finesse. So the high points are all protected. I can finesse everything to 99.9% perfection, take this off, and then finesse the remainder of it. Once again, you have a lot of options. So I'm going to default back to the wool pad. It's got the hub centering or the pad centering ring system. Apply polish right in the middle of the pad. I'm going to dial this to a speed setting of 1200 RPMs. I've infused the product into the pad. Now I can go up on an edge. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit higher, 1400 RPMs. And I can cut to the chase by using the friction generated by concentrating the power, which produces friction. So I'm concentrating the friction up onto an edge. What I will tell you is that based on this moment, that this clear coat is what I would consider hard clear coat. This could actually be ceramic clear. Ceramic clear, not to be confused with ceramic coatings. So ceramic clears are exceptionally hard. That's both the good news and the bad news. Good, because they are harder to scratch. Bad when it comes to actually removing defects. So in defense of the doctor scratch, and that's what you won't know, is you won't know how hard the clear coat is or isn't because you have very little experience to compare it with something else. I've polished so many cars, and based on the results, because I know how my pad works, I know how the polish can perform, but what I'm telling you is that 2500 grit on most other cars would come out far quicker than what these are coming out. So that then leads me to the conclusion that this clear coat is particularly hard. Which then leads me to the conclusion of, okay, I know what my desired results are to be, but then I know that I can still introduce additional forms of control. The speed setting of the buffer, how much pressure, how much of an edge I go up on, how long I sustain a particular spot in polishing, how many times I go back and forth, how much polish I actually put on the pad. So those are all the things that you still maintain control over. And I am scrutinizing this with my unaided eye. Based on that reflection, let me see if I can capture it. There we go. The paint is not perfect because I can tell that there's some scratches that were there initially that I did not sand away completely. But you see how that circle from the light source is much more refined? At this point, I would just, let's say I was doing this professionally, not for your viewing and learning pleasure, I would come in and I would scrutinize the moment even tighter. But this car also has to go into the body shop, which makes it for a good test dummy in order to work. So this is where, once again, you can apply strategy. So I took off this tape line. I want to finesse this area because that tape is approximately, we'll call that 1/4 of an inch. And I just want to finesse that high point without burning an edge, but I also know that this clear coat is particularly hard, so I can be a little less cautious and accept that I'm going to have to finesse this edge with a little more finessing than softer clear coats. Now, because this is factory original clear, I know that I don't have a spray booth. Like, let's say I burned through this edge. I don't have a spray booth that I can just pull this in and correct my mistake. So this is where you have to be particularly cautious. So as a rule, I'm always going to err on the side of caution because there's no unringing that bell of damage, if damage has in fact been done. So that's where I'm just going to keep this moment safe, even though I can destroy this area if I wanted to. Now, if this is black paint, I would most certainly have to follow up with the foam pad to remove the swirl marks that I have produced into this finish. So I'm going to switch to a foam pad. I've taken off the tape. And once again, hard clear coat, so I know that finessing with the foam pad on this is going to require more effort than finessing it on softer clears. For example, these are both a form of plastic, but I'm willing to bet that this plastic is softer when compared to the plastic of this hard clear coat. I want to do a little more work in this area here because I accept that this clear is probably softer. I'm going to just stick with the foam pad. I accept that there will be some polish residue inside the seam. One cool thing about this product is that it's true waterborne technology. It also has a surfactant in it, which means that when you introduce water to the equation, it literally turns into a soap, and so cleanup is super simple. Now, most detailers, they don't want to have to do any cleanup. They just want to have to like manage splatter, dust, overspray, and come in with a blower and just blow it off after the fact. I get that. But in the body shop world, that's very different. So for example here, if this was solvent-based compound, this is what's called plasticizing, where it becomes rock hard. But here, this is just my distilled water. And I'm just demonstrating, like, wow, like literally that just breaks down. And that's one of the kind of disturbing things about polishing as a beginner, is you have these moments and you're like, oh my gosh, that video I saw on YouTube didn't talk about this moment, what's going on? And you can go into freak out mode. So there, I just cleaned up that. And let me pull you in. So let's do this. See that? I'm particularly focused in on the lens of the car. So there, and we'll go over to the paint. Pull back a little bit. You can see the refinement of the light. Okay, party people. If you've learned but a single thing today, give it a thumbs up. Remember, I did not work on that lower half of the bumper. I only worked up there. Always check the links below. It'll take you to one of my websites where I wax longer and stronger on any topics that I cover today. What is clear coat? What are swirl marks? Many topics. So check that out, and we'll see you on the next video.